name is Melanie Lachcik, and I'm with Windy City Lug. I live in the Chicagoland area. I did Harry Potter book builds, so I was inspired by the books themselves because I think that they provide such evocative and beautiful things for us to think through. So that's what I wanted to capture. So I did a series of books where each book, I did 3 scenes from each of them. I tried to color coordinate them based on the series. So that's a small detail. If you own the books, you'll see that the bindings somewhat match to those. So I started with book 1, and it felt like, of course, I kind of had to start with Harry himself being dropped off at the Dursleys. So that was actually the very first one that I started with in this series was Harry as a child. So the next one that really captured my imagination in the book was when Harry goes to Diagon Alley right after he gets brought into Hogwarts. So he's getting all of his book builds, and I love tiny things. So anything that can represent potions and magic and animals. I also love that build because it's a lot of tiny pieces.
It's so much fun to find that one piece that really captures kind of the detail you're looking for.
Yes. So that one was, I just had so many pictures in my mind around the details of what Harry might have been experiencing when he was in an apothecary shop. So then the next one, my favorite part of the next one is actually the using snot techniques to invert and flip to do the house the gems for their house points, the House Cup award so this is the Great Hall, and so that for me was a little bit more of a technical challenge, trying to figure out how to flip the pieces to invert them to create like an hourglass. So I enjoyed doing that one. My other builds also capture anything greenery, so I knew I had to do something with Professor Sprout and the mandrakes. The next one is the petrified in the hospital. So that's something that's kind of underrepresented, so I wanted to make sure that kind of captured that part of the story, or the 4 kids who are in the hospital petrified. So the next one, a classic scene of Dobby being freed by Lucius Malfoy. I really liked trying to capture some sort of snot building on the back with the glass windows. I had a hard time capturing so many different scenes in the castle because the castle itself, a lot of the scenes take place in the castle, so trying to find different ways to represent the same space but not have it look uniform.
Some of these here, and like this one especially, have great flooring as well. The flooring details on a lot of these really make it stand out.
Thank you. I really wanted to try and represent, again, different aspects of the castle to have some sort of commonality, but also not look like I've done the exact same thing in every build. So this flooring, I love tile and trying to find, with all the new tile pieces that LEGO has put out, there's a lot of new opportunity to try stuff. But I was also working with somewhat of a monochromatic, because I didn't want fuchsia flooring because that wouldn't have made sense to be in Hogwarts. So trying to figure out what I could do with the within the constraints of the tile that LEGO provided in the kind of black, dark gray, light gray color palette. The next ones, we have Professor Trelawney and their divination class. That was one of my first ones that I did as well. The next one's the boys starting their first class with Hagrid at Care of Magical Creatures. And LEGO does put out a monster book, but it's a little bit bigger. It was more printed, so I wanted to capture something that felt more in line with the figs themselves, so they felt like they would have actually been holding those books.
So what elements did you use to kind of brick build that? So
it's a modified plate that has like teeth on the side with a tile on top, and then I used one of the Lego rubber bands for Harry's book to hold it closed because the boys came to class with their books bound. And then Draco's is using their chain piece. It's a really small chain piece. And I had to add a couple of stud pieces to twist it to make it big enough to fit around the binding. So a little bit out of scale, but you know. And I loved being able to use the new leaf elements too, because this LEGO has just put out in the last couple of years these new fall colors. And so I felt like it worked really well with like a fall class as opposed to a lot of the green stuff they already have out. This one is actually one of my favorite builds. Again, anything tiny with potions, that I really enjoy. It's the scene where Harry is caught by Snape coming back from Hogsmeade. And so my favorite detail in it is in the scene, Snape is holding the Marauders map, but he can't see what's on it because he's not Harry and he doesn't have the magic code. So it's a blank tile piece to represent a blank map that Snape can't see. So that's one of my favorite scenes. Again, kind of building on an angle, there's not a lot of options to do that in such a small space. So trying to figure out how to make it so it still looked curved and it was still gave some dimension, but keeping it in it's hard to do a tighter radius and a curve. So I was really pleased with the way that one turned out. This, I guess, was probably one of my other favorites, is Harry gets stuck in the stairs when he is out and about during Goblet of Fire. And so trying to represent a hall in a very small, tight space, I had a harder time locating stickers. I went through a lot of brickling stores to try and find sticker sheets that might represent what I wanted. So trying to find different things that would show that they would be in the Great Hall without still being in the theme, because there's some great portraits, but space theme wouldn't have worked in the Great Hall. So. And then the back one is also Goblet of Fire when Harry is rescuing the students underwater. Kudos to my husband, Dan, who's also a builder. He was the one who helped me think through the technique of being able to add elements. So these are columns, clear columns that are hollow in the middle. So they're just trans clear and trans light blue and then trans dark blue round tile that just get arranged. There's a very specific way that you can arrange them to get them in to actually get a plate on the bottom. So I think you can fit 6 of them in there, and then I just put a plate on the bottom. So then double layered that so that it provided some sort of depth effect for it.
That's such a nice technique for the water build like that.
The other thing that I like in that build that's a cool technique is the rope that binds them all is actually the sprue piece that comes on a larger leaf element. So it's the 3-leaf it's like 3 large leaves with this stud in the center that you can connect, and they all come on sprues. And so if you can get them with the sprue, then you have this nice flexible like vine piece that you can twist. So a little bit of an uncommon element, but it worked really well for the vines, I felt. Harry, first time he meets Voldemort after he comes alive. My favorite part of this build is if you know the books really well, Voldemort needs 3 specific elements to come back to life, which is the blood of an enemy, the bone of a father, and the flesh of a servant, or flesh of a friend servant. So all 3 of those elements are inside of his pot. So, and you can see that Peter Pettigrew, who's the character in there, I took his hand off because he's the one who donated that hand for Voldemort's life. So I like those hidden elements for people who really know the books who would be able to capture that.
You got to have the deep cuts in there for people.
Exactly. People, and it's when you see it and you know, and it's great. The next build is a really, I think, kind of an obscure scene. I, again, wanted to try and do something that people who just saw the movie might not necessarily seen. So this is not in the movies. It's when the Harry and Hermione and Ron happen to be visiting Arthur Weasley in the hospital, and they run across their old teacher, Gilderoy Lockhart. So, and it's at Christmas time, so it provided a little bit of a different understanding or a different look than the rest of the builds, because it's hospital white plus it's Christmas time. So, and then a classic scene in the Gryffindor common room where Sirius is in the fire, and they're talking to him, so you see his head. It was a little bit difficult to try and think through how I can represent a head in a fire without just looking like a head sitting on fire. So that was a little bit harder. I really enjoyed trying to build out a fireplace because that was something that I hadn't done a lot of before. So, and then trying to incorporate a feeling of being in a room and have the fireplace take up an appropriate amount of the space. So, then the next one is very classic with what some would say probably is the villain of the books, Professor Umbridge, being taken away by the centaurs in the forest. Another great technique that I think works well for these short trees is putting bars in the middle of them. It makes it much easier to transport them, or at least they just come in chunks. Often leaf elements don't transport very well, and so I'm constantly rebuilding trees. But these actually stayed pretty solid because of being able to hold them together through bars. You could also use flexible tubing, which I've seen before. They just, bars worked really well.
Fantastic.
And then books 6 and 7 actually are some of my favorite builds. Again, the first one is one that's a bit underrepresented. I don't think it's even in the movies. It's when they're learning how to apparate. And so one of the students tries to apparate and she splinches. So meaning her one leg is left in one hoop and her whole body shows up in another hoop. And so the students are all horrified and the professors come over and try and help. So representing it by just having a torso with one leg and then putting another leg in another hoop. So if you haven't read the books, it doesn't make sense, but I think it's very humorous. I appreciate it. And she's fine in the book, so it's not gory and graphic.
It's good to have fun with these, you know?
Exactly. You got to be able to laugh and enjoy. The next one is Harry in the Room of Requirement. There's quite a few scenes in the books with him, but this one specifically is when he's trying to stash his book, so Professor Snape doesn't know which book that he has from his potions class. The nod to the actual book Harry sees the diadem of Ravenclaw when he's in there during that scene, so I added a crown element because that comes into the story in book 7, where he later on remembers where he's seen the crown, and it's this specific scene. So wanted to make sure that there was a representation of a carry through from the books later.
Some great little medieval elements in there as well.
Yes, so, and that was something that was a little bit tricky because the Room of Requirement takes place, there's been stuff stashed in that room for centuries. And so thinking of, okay, what would be they said there's thousands of books, so what could I incorporate that wasn't necessarily in Harry's time frame, but it also would represent something that could have been in Hogwarts possession over centuries. So I wanted to think through, medieval, something that you wouldn't find in the rest of the books, but also representative of what another Hogwarts student might have had. The next one is the Horcrux with Professor Dumbledore and Harry. I had originally used that a necklace piece I believe it's from an elf set, and it comes in it comes in dark gray, and it just blended too much. So I ended up doing multiple buys. I did a lot of that, like, this isn't working, we're gonna have to buy again. And so that was a multiple buy, but I was really happy with the golden one because it contrasted a lot more. That was a little bit difficult because I wanted to represent the vastness of the lake that they were on, and I wanted to do some depth, but what I was doing, it was just too small of a surface for me so I had to sort of pare down and edit what I was trying to build to capture something that was evocative, but and represented the scene, but could actually work well on such a small surface space. The next one is actually one of my favorites as well. It's not Harry, but it's representative of the three brothers for the Deathly Hallows when they meet death on a bridge and they ask for their elements of to help them defeat death or to evade death. So it's something that is not told, I don't think, really well in the movies, but it's a really great scene in the books that sort of ties the whole story together as to who Voldemort is and why he's pursuing some of these objects. So that was a little bit of a different take than the rest of the scene, since the rest of them feature a lot of main characters.
I love how you've built this one out with even the water under the bridge and everything. It creates such a great scene.
Yes, thanks. I knew the scene itself talks about there's water that they can't get over that's sort of overflowing and it's too deep. And so even though I know the waters are sort of overflowing, that was intentional, really wanting to show like the fullness of the river and why they couldn't go over the river. So it was, I really enjoyed doing that one. That was a lot of fun. The next one is Hermione and Bellatrix at the Malfoy mansion, and then you see the rest of the characters getting out in the basement. The only one that I did that's double layer, so wanted to provide some height and some interest around just different sizes, since I had done a 2-tier, so it's a bit more simplistic, but wanting to again get some depth and height. And then a nod to Slytherin by putting an S in the tile work as well. So it's very definitively a Malfoy, Slytherin, some sort of dark part of that family. And then the last build was actually the one I did last minute. It was a bit of a panic moment because I definitely waited too long. And
It's not a Lego show without at least one last-minute build.
this was like 24 hours before we're coming. I'm digging through all of our pieces, trying to figure out what I'm going to do. I finally settle on a plan of what I'm going to do, and of course I don't have the elements that I want to use. So, and it's way too late to place any orders for anything. So, it really came out of me digging through our collection and figuring out what do we have, how I want some sort of green, trans clear, and red orange. What do we have? So I love it because it provides the end result of it was a result of me just seeing what do I have in my collection that will work, and how can I represent what I want and not have to go scrambling to find more stuff. So often that's how I build, is just sort of digging through our collection. What do we have? What connections work? And then making that work within the build. So that was my final one. And then also using a technique on the bottom of not fully snapping down the tile so it shows like some movement. I wanted to show that the explosion created the tiles or the rubble around them, that there was destruction. So that's just simply not snapping everything down, which I've had a loss of fingernails as I was trying to like make those elements work right.
Thank you for your sacrifice here for the build.
Right? Anything for the final product for sure.
So these scenes are all fantastic, but of course they're built on top of the books themselves, which is a great idea as well. So talk about kind of the build structure of the books and how that incorporates into the scene.
Yeah, so I wanted a common element again, and it was the inspiration for the Lego put out the Hans Christian Andersen build a couple years ago, and I loved that it was something small showing a book, but also a scene, and so that was one of the. I think I could expand on that. So I did have to modify it because they're from their original build. I got all of the side pages are a modified brick, a 1x2 modified, so that with the lines on the side, so you can get the look. Feel of a page. They come in two colors, so I chose to do the majority of them in tan, although the H and the P are in white as a standout a little bit. There's a lot of, I had to find like junk brick that we use, a lot of stuff like junk plates, junk brick that make them more solid so that I could build on them. They're not solid underneath. They're just plates, then a plate on the bottom, then the bricks on the perimeter, and another plate on top, and then they're just held up by stuff that we don't care about in the inside. And then the bindings, wanting to do, each of the books have a faceplate, and so then I printed out water transfer decals with all of the names so that you could identify them. And then the ones that I used as support, they're just the rounded slopes to do that. So wanting uniformity on some level. So I had to do a lot of hunting and searching because not all of the pieces for the book come in all colors. So I had to find, okay, which ones can I use? How do I modify it so it actually works with all the colors I wanted? So I started with what colors do I want, then what does Lego make in those colors, and what can I get in a uniform way for all of the colors? So that was something that I would highly recommend if you're going to do a larger build, to make sure that before you start actually planning and solidifying your plans that you have the piece availability. Because I did have to make several changes simply because Lego doesn't make certain things in colors, and for me the color was very important. I wanted them to be represented and as uniform as possible. So yeah, so and then I did some extra books just to provide some height so they weren't all on the same level. So again, that one I learned a lot. In the bottom, if you don't see them, there's like junk plate. They're not the same colors. So even if I were to redo them, I thought I really could have some of these scenes, knowing what they are now, I didn't have to have the specific color underneath the builds because you don't see them anyway. So I could have saved myself some money and a lot of time if I had have known that. But at this point, thinking through like how they were going to be structured, you could do it in cheaper than the way I actually did it. But
it's always a learning process, though.
Yeah, and I would never, and you know, I often think, oh, well, maybe next time. Honestly, there isn't going to be a next time. Like, I'm not going to take these down and return anything that I have. They are what they are. I know for next time that I do a build, I've learned, and so I know, to really think through. But often it was just, I didn't even know when I built the books what I was going to put on top. So I just knew that I had them, and so yeah, definitely a learning process.
Well, this is fantastic work. Thank you for taking the time to take us through each scene here. I love the way you displayed all these, so can't wait to see more from you in the future.
Thank you so much.